Hi guys, Theta here, and this is the first ever example of something I am calling Casual Monday. This is not the rigid and structured content that my channel usually consists of, so I have gone to some lengths to make sure it's obviously different, more casual. I'm sitting down, I'm wearing a robe, I'm drinking a mug of something. The content will be much more freeform and much shorter. It's casual. I realize at a certain point this much effort to seem casual makes it, well, not so casual. But Theta's less structured collection of critical observations after each weekend didn't really roll off the tongue. Thus, Casual Monday. Basically, this is a series of thoughts I believed worth sharing on all the episodes of current shows that I've watched in the previous 7 days. It's not about what I liked or didn't like, though there will be some of that. It's more like the bullet point, abbreviated version of the kind of content that I've been making all along. Shows may drop in and out of these little roundups each week, depending on my interest or how the series is going. For this first video, not every series has had its first episode yet, so this is unlikely to represent the whole catalog going forward. Now, this is not spoiler-free commentary, but for all the first episodes of new series, I am trying to be spoiler light. Hopefully that means you can listen to these thoughts without wrecking the first episode for yourself, as some of my observations might spark your interest in a series even if you haven't seen it yet. For the shows that are sequel series, and there's only one in this video, I will instead be pretty spoilerific. In subsequent videos, I will be spoiler heavy in all segments so that I can actually discuss everything I want to discuss, so you'll have to skip those sections if you don't want to have things ruined. At the very end, I have a question about this format that I wouldn't mind some feedback on if you make it that far. So let us casually roll that title. We will start off with that time I got reincarnated as a slime. So, isekai shows, different world shows, have come out with a lot of regularity lately. There is some community pushback on this from oversaturation, right? But I don't think the genre by itself is fundamentally flawed. The problem usually comes from it being an excuse for wish fulfillment fantasy, made extra relatable by having the main character be someone from our world. Someone literally just like you or me. It's no coincidence that a lot of the installments in this genre that have been well received have not featured an overpowered protagonist, but rather one who struggles, whether that be for the sake of drama or for the sake of comedy. So, on the surface of our slime show, having a character summoned into a fantasy world to become not the greatest of heroes, but the lowest of monsters already seems promising, right? It makes me wish that I hadn't seen the credit sequence at the end, as it reveals that our slime will probably not be so lowly or maybe even slime shapes down the stretch. That said, it's interesting to have the circumstances of death determine what kind of abilities one awakens with or how they translate to this fantasy world. I would write this off as just flavor, except for two things. One was the first scene that featured a girl who dies during what I think is some of the firebombing of World War II. The other is having it confirmed for us that being summoned into this world is not something unheard of. That's a pretty strong indicator that this other girl, if not others, will show up again in the story. If the circumstances of others' deaths similarly result in the type of powers they possess, then that has some interesting potential. At the very least, someone who died in World War II would have lived in a very different Japan than the one of the present. What kind of contrasting worldviews might they take for granted? How will a fantasy world look to each of them through the lens of their different experiences? They may not go this route at all, but it's all the potential for interesting takes on the isekai model that gets me interested in watching further. There are several moments to suggest that this will have a lot of humor, but that doesn't mean that there might not also be some engaging characters and conversations along the way. Next is Rascal Does Not Dream of Bunny Girl Senpai. Having a bunny girl in the show title and key visual for the series probably gives the wrong impression. It draws notice by being outside expectations. It turns out the reference is being used in-universe for exactly this conspicuous nature, a pragmatic way of detecting attention. It's not sex appeal just to add sex appeal, but the characters also don't act like it was completely innocuous. It's a tiny part of the opening story, but it fixes the main girl in our protagonist's mind due to its outlandishness. Since the key part of their relationship starts from him noticing her when no one else did, giving her some visual way she stands out provides an immediate image for us to fix on as to why the guy would alter his normal behavior. This idea of disruption feels like it will be important. Both characters have been shifted out of their familiar worlds by the same affliction, the adolescent syndrome, or puberty syndrome, or whatever they will decide to call it. The show reminds me a little bit of those key visual novel adaptations, where there is a light, little supernatural element that is not really the focus, but creates a slightly unfamiliar setting for the character dramas to play out. I imagine people will immediately be reminded of both Oregairu and the Monogatari series, owing largely to how dialogue-dense the series is so far. It's not as overtly supernatural or stylized as Monogatari, and at the moment, it feels like it will be a little more romantic and soft than Oregairu. But all three of those anime share a pattern of main characters talking past each other without constantly stopping to react, which leads to conversations that quickly dive past surface-level chatter and into subjects diverse and profound, and sometimes ridiculous. Both of our main characters display a very limited range of external emotion, but their dialogue betrays this as facade. I think both feel a wide range of things, whether or not they are eager to cop to it. I must say, this was one of those rare episodes that made me immediately want to watch it again. I know we're not doing full spectrum analysis this season, but so far, this would have been on the short list for consideration. It's just very careful, you know? It's composed with a lot of intention, and it's prizing subtlety over being perfectly understood. It's a rich experience already, and it flashes a lot of promise. But I gotta tell you, I think I can feel the sadness coming from the outset. If they keep giving us genuine characters, it's probably going to get rough at some point, but it's probably going to be worth it too. So, Zombieland Saga. I actually don't like zombie stories in general. I find loss of agency psychologically upsetting enough that it usually interferes with my enjoyment. However, MAPPA as a studio so far seems to want to tell different kinds of stories. Good or bad, their stuff I've seen is always divergent from what I initially expect. So, even if zombies are not really my bag, I figured I had to give this a go. It will therefore not surprise you to learn that it was surprising. Or maybe it's not surprising because it was surprising, and the actual biggest surprise would have been to serve up something generic, right? Well, either way, this initial episode is one step ahead of the audience's expectations almost from the first moments, and we struggle to catch up nearly to the end. This might actually be an idol show, or it might be a horror-themed comedy, or maybe the strangest harem ever, or it might even be Magical Girls for all I know. I'm pretty sure it's not a mecha, but it's definitely not serious. There is some cleverness in the storytelling with expectations, as I already said, but also in the way they are introducing elements of the story. Using the nature of zombies to forestall introducing a lot of personalities at once is a kind of casually excellent move. It lets the absurdity of the initial setup take center stage for the bulk of the premiere, and firmly fixes the perspective character in the audience's sympathies. There's only tenuous details about the only other character with any development and his kind of abstract goal, further enticing us forward by preserving the mystery of why someone would do all of these things in the first place. Maybe this won't be the most profound thing ever. We'll probably need to see the rest of our personalities to have any real idea of what we're in for, but as far as bucking expectations, the series delivers so far. So Iroduku, The World in Colors, I was so worried that I wouldn't be able to see this one. I feel like Netflix has been snapping up all of the PA Works series lately, so when this showed up on Amazon, I'm pretty sure I smiled for a solid minute. Then I got to watch it, and I smiled for a lot longer. We follow a young mage from 60 years in the future who is sent back in time by her grandmother to meet up with her grandmother, just 60 years younger, which I think makes them about the same age. It seems like it is our world in most ways, except magic exists, though so far it is very low-key magic. Nothing yet looks like anything more than just charms, except for the whole, time travel thing. Anyway, our main girl can no longer see color, which is somehow related to being a mage. Just as the color has gone out of her world, it seems she's also lost some of her vitality. She retracts from others, she is very sedate and uncertain. She doesn't seem like she even wants anything to do with magic. The show will flip to her point of view frequently to show us what the world looks like to her, a grayscale waste. The rest of the time, though, the scenery is practically bursting with color, bringing her muted perspective into sharp relief. So far, this is exactly the kind of series that PA Works excels at. Slow developing, character-based stories where the setting itself is so rich that it becomes a kind of character in its own right. I will watch basically anything PA Works does because whether it's good or bad, it's pretty much always going to be gorgeous. This series is right in their wheelhouse, because the visual splendor they deliver is more than just style for this story, it's part of the substance. Just like our Bunny Girl show, this one is very carefully crafted, though I wouldn't be surprised if they end up with very different tones. So Goblin Slayer has as its setting a fantasy world that behaves like an RPG, though without the characters being self-aware about this. It is going to remind a lot of people of Grimgar of Fantasy and Ash, I think, because its main shtick so far is to present such a fantasy world with realism, even if it is brutal and upsetting realism. Goblin Slayer looks like it's going for a darker tone than Grimgar, but so far this does not seem like it is only dark for darkness' sake. It's not just being edgy. It's meant instead as a strong counterpoint to our prospective characters' naivete about what adventuring really entails and how steep the cost of failure. This initial episode is designed to be upsetting, to banish any expectations that this is some kind of self-insert fantasy. If you are really sensitive to character trauma, you might want to think twice about this one. Now, because of this, the premiere successfully engages the audience's sympathies for the awfulness that our priestess goes through on her first day in the adventuring world, but it also prompts us to root for her by having her defy the expected outcome. Toward the end, there is a narration about common occurrences, things that happen quite often in this world. Each part of this includes something that happened to the members of their party, including the priestess, but while the common pattern should have her laying her adventures aside, we conclude by seeing her do the opposite. She has equipped herself for more adventures, this time wiser, a little more prepared. This gives her a complete step on her character journey inside the first episode, something that is always promising to see in a series. Now, while this episode focused a lot on dispelling the mystery and intrigue around adventuring, in fact, pretty much violently tearing it down, it preserves a lot of the mystery around the titular Goblin Slayer. The way his armor masks his identity and even muffles his voice is latent with significance, and his preoccupation with killing goblins is not going to be random. They are the lowest monsters in this world, and he is of the highest tier of adventurers. And yet he shows up to kill goblins, is setting out again at the end to kill goblins, keeps a careful count of the goblins he kills, and he gives his name as Goblin Slayer. The dude likes to kill goblins, and I don't think he does it because it's the best thing for his adventuring career. Now, it's not like the goblins really endear themselves to us or anything, but if they are the least powerful thing in this world, then there should be a really good reason why he isn't spending his time against greater threats, right? Like, there's probably not a lot of glory in being the Goblin Slayer. Teasing out some of that mystery is part of what is going to draw our interest onward, and this first episode suggests that he will be pretty intractable. But since our priestess did not break at this first trauma, perhaps her unexpectedly strong willpower can influence whatever character journey the Goblin Slayer is going to trace. The third season of Sword Art Online, called Alicization, begins with a double episode. This ends up being particularly effective because the entire first half feels like a different anime entirely, not giving any context for why things are as they are until the end of the segment. This lets us feel just as immersed but also out of sorts as Kirito feels. The whole thing has the texture of a dream or fairy tale, where there are clearly understood rules and constraints, but without any thought to question why. Things just are a certain way, as in dreams. The later description of the technology involved in this kind of full dive will suggest that a dreamlike state might be exactly what they are trying to replicate. Forcing the audience to experience a self-contained world without precedent or explanation gets the idea across completely, all while setting up a new story setting, conflict, and characters that exist apart from the ongoing threads that we already know. It's a really smart use of a double episode in the middle of a long series, because the second half will make it all click into place for us. There is a "the gang's all here" interlude scene to re-establish our setting and cast and show us that time has progressed. It's kinetic and frantic and a sharp counterpoint to the dreamy pace of the first half. It's as familiar and consistent to our expectations as the first half was unfamiliar and inconsistent. Now, it masquerades as a tone shift just to throw a lot of well-animated action at us, but it also plants the first seeds of one of these story threads, and foreshadows some antagonistic characters who lurk in our protagonist's future. They also take a moment to remind us of our lead's romance, which is a key part of what motivates them. A potential future path is laid before them, yet even besides the cliffhanger ending, we should probably expect that a lot of hurdles are going to rise up between them and their new shared goal. The story is giving us a signpost to judge our progress against, yet reassures us that this is not a source of interpersonal conflict, at least for now. There is a little bit of an exposition dump in here to try to catch us up on the full dive tech being used for Underworld. This too benefits from being in a double episode, where it does not take up as significant a fraction of the whole. It is introducing this soul translator tech and the time dilation effect that it can have, which are both interesting concepts to complicate the series' premise. I think Sword Art Online is at its best when it focuses on the sometimes blurred line between virtual worlds and the real world, and I think the relatability of that concept was part of why the show has been successful. The moment in the very first episode of the series where everyone trapped in Aincrad is forced to look like their real-life selves is an underappreciated storytelling move. While we've had several arcs where people's online and offline actions intersect, the introspective, personal focus on this dichotomy is something that I'd like to see more of. This opening episode for Alicization suggests to me that we may head that direction. Even besides the emotional influence of Underworld that we see follow Kirito into the waking world, there have been a couple of instances of the line being blurred. One is the sensor embedded in him that transmits his vitals online. And even though they cover the significance by having Asuna play the overly attached girlfriend, that is a pretty eerie mixing of one's online and offline selves. When Kirito later reaches reflexively for a sword that isn't there, the subconscious blurring of the line is reiterated once again. Kaiba from the very first arc was the most interesting antagonist in the series to my mind, and I always got the impression that the tension of keeping one's online and offline selves distinct was something that intrigued him. I am hopeful that their discussion about him means that some of his musings and influence are going to surface as dominant themes. If nothing else, the cursory look at the STL and the way it functions makes me think that this is the territory that we are setting off toward. Anyway, there are like 5 different story threads set up in this initial premiere, as well as the strong external reference to the Alice in Wonderland mythology. Alice's quest to navigate the weird world she finds herself in and return to her own reality is a story that is ripe for parallel to virtualization, so I'll be interested to see what they do with that. So just a couple other miscellaneous asides. I did watch SSSS Gridman, but I am not familiar with the mid-90s show that it is referencing, so I am not yet sure if I will be all in. The Sentai superhero type of shows are not really my thing, so I don't have much experience to pull from. I really enjoyed all of the parts of the opening outside of the robot versus kaiju main event, so I'm going to give it a chance. The way the characters react to the protagonist's amnesia was a particular highlight for me. That's a tired trope usually, but this felt a lot more believable and confusing than what we normally see. I also thought I would have watched A Certain Magical Index 3 for this video, but I'm not sure anyone has picked it up for distribution for the US, which I find really odd. The Raildex universe is kind of a guilty pleasure of mine. The main series has a lot of structural woes at times, which is especially obvious just by comparing it to the Railgun side series, which is much more tightly structured. But the world building for this universe fascinates me, and some of the arcs have been really enjoyable, so I am always suitably entertained. I'll find out by next week if this is going to be a go or not. Anyway, here's the thing that I wanted people's opinion for. Would there be any value in also rendering out each segment of this video as its own YouTube video? Like, I would still have the single one with everything collected in one place, like this one that you just watched, but in my workflow, it's not really a lot of extra work to also make each series into a really short video that I upload at the same time. Like, if you were only watching a couple of these, do you really want to skip around me talking about a half dozen other shows you aren't interested in? Or would it be better to have the option to go directly to a standalone video for each segment that also has its own comment section focused on just that anime? I would put links to every one of these shorter videos in the description of all of them so that you could just bounce around that way if you like. I think if I push them all live at the same time, it won't spam a dozen notifications either, and I would only tweet out the compilation one when it does go live. Let me know. We might try it next week just to see. So, that has been Casual Monday. I'll see you next Monday.